90 days. That's all it took for me to lose everything I had built in my life. I came to the United States with dreams that my family believed in. They trusted me. They sacrificed for me. And I failed them. In just 3 months. My name is Arjun Sharma. I am from Nagpur, a city in Maharashtra that people outside India don't know much about. But to me, it was the whole world. A city of oranges, of red dust, of a summer heat that cracks the earth, and of a family that gave me everything they had, including everything they didn't have. I was 36 years old when I boarded that plane. 36. Not a young man chasing adventure. Not a student with nothing to lose. A grown man. A son. A brother. Someone who had already spent half his life trying, and somehow still felt like he hadn't done enough. Let me tell you about my family, because without understanding them, you will never understand what truly happened to me in America. My father, Ramesh Sharma, worked as a small government clerk for 31 years. Every single morning, without fail, he would wake up at 5:30, carefully fold his white shirt, the same kind of shirt every single day, and leave the house before the sun had even appeared. He never complained, never asked for more. He simply worked, and worked, and worked, with the quiet dignity of a man who believes that honest effort is the greatest form of love. My mother, Savitri, was a primary school teacher at a public school in our neighborhood. She taught children with worn-out notebooks and broken chalk, and even so she smiled as if she were in the best place in the world. At night, after grading papers, she still found energy to cook dinner, tell stories, and ask me, every single night without exception, "Arjun, did you study today?" I was the eldest son, and in our culture you know what that means. It means you carry not only your own destiny, but the destiny of everyone who came before you. For years, I tried different paths within India. I worked in sales, tried a small import business, took computer courses. Some things worked for a while, most didn't, and every failure, no matter how small, I felt like a stone being placed on my family's chest. They never said it with words, but I could see it in my father's eyes. That tired look, full of delayed hope. It was my uncle Suresh who planted the seed. He had been living in New Jersey for almost 8 years. He called occasionally, always with that excited voice, telling stories about the dollar salary, about the apartment he had bought, about how life there was something else entirely. On one of those calls, he spoke directly, "Arjun, you are wasting your time there. Come here, here. A man who truly works can change his life in 1 year. 1 year, my boy. 1 year." Those 2 words entered my head and never left. I started researching, started calculating, and without realizing it, I started believing. The conversation with my family happened on an October evening. My father, my mother, my younger sister Priya and I, sitting around the table after dinner. I presented my plan with as much confidence as I could gather. I said I was going to the United States, that I would work hard, that within 1 year I would be sending enough money to pay off the house debts, help with Priya's wedding, and maybe even bring my parents to visit me. There was silence for a few seconds. Then my mother began to cry. Not from sadness, from hope. That kind of cry that hurts in a different way, because you know those tears carry the weight of years of sacrifice, and a love that no longer knows how to express itself, except through tears. My father didn't cry. He simply placed his hand over mine and said, "Go, son, go and don't bring us shame." That sentence I still hear today. To gather the money for the ticket, the visa, and the initial reserve, my family did things I only discovered later, and that break my heart to this day. My mother sold the gold earrings she had received on her wedding day. 22 years kept safe. She took them out of the small red velvet box where they lived, handed them to the jeweler without hesitation, and came home smiling as if she had done the simplest thing in the world. My father took a loan from the neighborhood cooperative bank, putting the title of our small house as collateral. I only found out the day before I traveled, when he called me into the bedroom and showed me the papers, without drama, just as a piece of information. "This house now depends on you too," he said, "but I trust you." My sister Priya, who worked as a receptionist at a clinic, saved 3 months of salary and gave it to me in an envelope, saying it was for emergencies. She was 28 years old and dreamed of getting married. That money was probably meant for her own trousseau. In total, we gathered around 4,50,000 rupees, a fortune for our family, a bet. On the day of my departure, Nagpur airport was full of goodbyes. My mother held me in an embrace so long that I had to gently pull away to avoid missing boarding. My father squeezed my hand tightly, that thick hand marked by decades of work, and said nothing. Sometimes a father's silence says more than any speech. I boarded the plane with a 23-kilogram suitcase, an English dictionary my mother had bought at the newsstand, and a heart full of a strange mixture of terror and hope that I wouldn't be able to name until much later. It was almost 18 hours of flight with a layover in Dubai. I didn't sleep for a single moment. I kept staring out the window at that deep blue outside, thinking about my parents, the mortgaged house, my mother's gold earrings. I cannot fail, I repeated to myself. I simply cannot fail. When the plane began its descent over the state of Ohio, where my uncle had arranged a contact to host me for a few days, I saw for the first time that American winter landscape. It was December. Everything was covered in a grey layer. No leaves on the trees, no color, no warmth. A cold I had never felt in my life began to surround me while still inside the plane, just from looking at that sky. But I smiled, because I still believed. I still didn't know what that cold was about to do to me. I still didn't know that in 90 days I would be sleeping inside a car, too ashamed to call home. But that was still to come. Ohio in winter is not a place. It is a feeling that enters your bones before you even understand what is happening. When I walked out of Columbus Airport carrying my suitcase, the air hit me like a wall, minus 15 degrees. I had read about this. I had mentally prepared myself, but no preparation in the world prepares you for feeling a cold like that for the first time in your life, when you have spent 36 years in a place where the coldest winter you ever knew was 22 degrees. My coat, the one I had bought at a popular market in Nagpur for 800 rupees, thinking it would be enough, meant absolutely nothing against that wind. My uncle Suresh's contact was a man named Vijay, Gujarati, in his early 50s, owner of a small convenience store in a working-class neighborhood in Columbus. He had promised my uncle he would let me stay in the back room of his apartment for 2 weeks, enough time for me to get organized and find work. The back room was the size of a medium bathroom. There was a thin mattress on the floor, a window that didn't close completely, and a constant stream of cold air coming through the gap, as if the wall didn't exist. Vijay was a good man, but a busy one. He had no time, nor any obligation, to receive me like family. He gave me the key, showed me where the bathroom was, and said, "Arjun bhai, nobody survives here without working. Starting tomorrow, you look for a job." And that was exactly what I did. In the first week, I walked for hours through the streets of Columbus with my printed resume. Yes, printed, because I had read on a forum that some places still asked for a physical resume. The cold burned my face. My lips cracked on the third day. My hands, even inside the cheap gloves I had bought at a dollar store, went numb after 20 minutes outside. But I kept going. I walked into Indian restaurants, Pakistani ones, Mexican ones. I went to gas stations, supermarkets, convenience stores. My English was functional. I had learned enough to communicate. But the accent, the hesitation, the way I held the paper with both hands and gave an involuntary slight bow when handing over the resume, all of it gave me away as someone who had arrived just days before. In most places, they didn't even look at me. On the 10th day, I received 2 positive responses. The first was at a seafood restaurant called Harbour Grill. Dishwasher night shift, 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning, $9.50 per hour. The second was at a distribution warehouse for a large chain, loading and unloading boxes, morning shift, 5 to 1 in the afternoon, $11 per hour. I accepted both. Yes, both at the same time. I calculated, if I worked both jobs, 5 days a week at each, with some schedule overlaps, I would try to negotiate. I could bring in around $2,300 per month. Subtracting the rent, I had found a room in a shared apartment with 3 other immigrants for $450, food and transportation. I could send home somewhere between $800 and $900 every month. In rupees, that was enough to pay the loan installment, help my parents with expenses, and still have a little left over. On paper, it seemed like a solid plan. In real life, it was a sentence. The routine began in the second week. I woke up at 4 in the morning, showered with water that took 3 minutes to warm up, ate something quick, bread with peanut butter, sometimes just a banana, caught the bus at 4:45 to arrive at the warehouse by 5 sharp. The warehouse was enormous. A hall perhaps 200 meters long, with loading docks where trucks arrived at any hour. The work was physical in a way I had never experienced. Boxes of drinks, appliances, frozen food. Some weighed more than 30 kilograms. You carried, stacked, registered, moved. 8 hours without stopping, with a 30-minute break in the middle. In the beginning, I could barely lift my arms when I got home. After the warehouse shift, I had about 4 hours. I tried to sleep 1 or 2 hours, ate whatever was left from the day before, and at 6 in the evening, I was back on the bus to Harbour Grill. At the restaurant, the work was different but no less exhausting. Plates piled to the ceiling, grease everywhere, the constant smell of seafood that sticks to your clothes and won't come out even after 3 showers. The environment was loud, fast-paced, and the other workers, mostly Latinos and some Africans, had their own groups, their own languages, their own jokes. I didn't belong to any group. I smiled when someone looked at me. I nodded when I didn't understand something. And I washed plate after plate after plate until 2 in the morning, when I caught the last bus back to the apartment. I arrived home at 3, slept until 4, and started all over again. Loneliness is a strange thing. It is not just the absence of people. It is the constant presence of a silence you cannot fill. I was surrounded by people all the time, at the warehouse, at the restaurant, on the crowded bus at midnight, and yet I never felt so completely alone in my life. In Nagpur, I woke up to the sound of my mother in the kitchen, to the smell of chai drifting under the door, to the voice of my father reading the newspaper out loud to no one in particular, to a neighborhood that was alive, noisy, irritating, and wonderful all at once. Here, I woke up to the silence of an apartment where the other residents were also too exhausted to talk, each in their own corner, each in their own struggle. I started calling my mother every Sunday night. It was the part of the week I looked forward to the most, and feared the most at the same time. She always asked, "How are you, son? Are you eating well? Are you sleeping?" And I always answered, "I'm great, Ma. Everything is going well." While I said that, I was sitting on the floor of my room with feet so sore I could barely take off my shoes. My father asked about the money. I said I would make the first transfer soon. He said, "Very good," in that contained voice, and I felt the weight of that "very good" like bricks being placed on my shoulders. My sister Priya texted every week, "Bye, when are you going to send money for Ma's medicines?" My mother's medicines. I had forgotten she took medication for blood pressure. One more thing that depended on me. It was in the 4th week that I noticed something was not right with my body. I started waking up with my eyes stuck shut, not from sleep, from swelling, puffy eyelids, red, watering for no reason. I thought it was tiredness. I thought it was the new soap I had bought. But then came the cough, a dry, persistent cough that started when I went outside and only got worse throughout the day. At the warehouse, where the loading docks stayed open for the trucks and the outside air came straight in, the cough became unbearable. I would go to the bathroom, cough until my eyes watered, splash water on my face, and go back to the boxes. Then came the shortness of breath, small at first, a feeling that my lungs weren't expanding fully, as if someone had squeezed my chest from the inside with their hands. At night, at the restaurant, the hot steam from the kitchen clashed with the freezing air that came through the back door every time someone went out to throw away trash. Hot, cold, hot, cold. My body no longer knew what to do. In the 5th week, I woke up at 4 in the morning and couldn't get out of bed. Not from laziness, not from weakness of character. I simply could not breathe. I lay there staring at the ceiling of my tiny room, listening to the air entering and leaving my lungs with a wheeze I had never heard before. The cold from the barely closed window came in waves. Outside, the thermometer read -18 degrees. In that moment, for the first time since arriving in America, a question entered my head and never left. Now what? It wasn't a question about work. It wasn't about money. It was about me. About this 36-year-old man lying on the floor of a rented room, thousands of kilometers from home, with failing lungs, destroyed feet, and a heart full of a guilt that still had no name. And the worst part of all, I still hadn't sent a single cent home. The body was failing, the money was running out, and I still didn't have the courage to tell anyone the truth. What was coming next would be worse than anything I had lived through. There is a moment in every man's life when he realizes he is losing control. Not all at once, not in one great dramatic explosion, but slowly, piece by piece, like a wall that silently cracks before it collapses. For me, that moment was on a Tuesday morning, in the shared bathroom of the apartment, staring at my own reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized myself. The man staring back at me had sunken eyes, purple from exhaustion, dry skin, peeling on the cheeks from the constant cold, cracked lips with a small cut at the corner that hadn't healed in days. I had lost weight. How much? I didn't know, but the trousers that had arrived tight were now loose at the waist. I coughed 3 times in a row before I could wash my face. And then I looked at the mirror again and thought, my mother cannot see me like this. I went to the emergency room on a Saturday morning, after a night when the shortness of breath woke me at 3 in the morning and wouldn't let me go back to sleep. I took 2 buses to reach the nearest hospital that accepted patients without health insurance. The wait was almost 5 hours. I sat in that waiting room, fluorescent lights, cold, smelling of alcohol and plastic, surrounded by people who also seemed to be at their limit. A woman with a small child crying without stopping, an elderly man coughing more than I was, a young woman sleeping sitting up with her head leaning against the wall. I kept staring at the floor and trying not to think about how much that consultation was going to cost. When they finally called me, the doctor, a young Asian woman with tired but kind eyes, examined me for about 15 minutes. She listened to my lungs, checked my throat, asked some questions about allergy history. Then she said, "You have severe allergic rhinitis aggravated by dry air and extreme cold. Your bronchial tubes are inflamed. If you continue exposing yourself to these conditions without treatment, you may develop bronchial asthma." She prescribed 2 types of nasal spray, a bronchodilator, an antihistamine, and an oral corticosteroid for 10 days. She told me to avoid environments with abrupt temperature changes, to wear a mask when going outside, and to rest. Rest. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't have the energy even for that. At the pharmacy, the medications cost $187. I had $232 in my account. I paid without blinking because there was no other option, and walked out of the pharmacy with $45 in my pocket and a bag of medicines that represented almost everything I had. I went back to the warehouse the following Monday. The supervisor, a man named Derek, short, broad-shouldered, always with a coffee mug in his hand, looked me up and down when I walked in. "Arjun, you left on Thursday without notice. That's an unjustified absence." I explained I had been sick, that I went to the hospital, that I had documentation. He picked up the paper, looked at it for 2 seconds, and handed it back. "You missed 3 shifts. We don't pay for days not worked here, you know that. And look, if you can't keep up with the pace here, I need someone who can." It wasn't an outright threat. It was something worse, a cold warning, delivered with total indifference, as if I were a replaceable part in a large machine, which, to him, I was exactly that. I worked the entire day coughing. Every box I lifted required an effort that had once been automatic. My chest ached. The cold air from the open loading docks went straight into my bronchial tubes like needles. During the lunch break, I went to the bathroom, pulled the bronchodilator from my pocket, took 2 puffs, and leaned against the wall for 5 minutes, until I could breathe normally again. The man in the hospital bathroom mirror was following me everywhere. On Thursday of the same week, I had the worst crisis yet. I was on the night shift at Harbour Grill when, without warning, my chest closed completely. It wasn't a cough, it was a wall, as if someone had sealed my lungs shut from the inside with their hands. I started to heave, leaning my hands on the edge of the sink, trying to pull in air. One of the cooks, a Mexican man named Rodrigo, who had taught me how to organize the washing station in the first week, came running when he heard the noise. "Brother, are you okay? Hey, someone get the manager!" The manager came. He saw me hunched over, unable to speak, with my lips slightly blue. He called emergency services. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. They spent the whole night stabilizing me. Acute bronchospasm, they said, caused by the combination of insufficiently controlled allergy, continuous cold exposure, and severe physical stress. They gave me nebulization, more intravenous medication, and sent me home with an explicit instruction. "You cannot work in a cold environment for at least 2 weeks, possibly more." 2 weeks. I stared at that hospital discharge paper for a long time. 2 weeks without working meant 2 weeks without income. And 2 weeks without income, for a man in my situation, was not an inconvenience. It was an abyss. Harbour Grill let me go the following day. The manager was polite, even sympathetic, but firm. They couldn't hold the position for me. There was a waiting list of candidates. He said if I recovered, I could try again, but the position, no. The warehouse took 3 more days. Derek called me one morning and said bluntly, "Arjun, I'm going to have to let you go. Operational capacity issues." Operational capacity. I had lost both jobs in less than a week. Those first days without work were the strangest of my life. I stayed in the room, taking my medications at the right times, trying to rest, as the doctor had ordered. But the silence of the room during the day was deafening. Every hour that passed was money I wasn't earning. Every day was an installment of my father's loan accumulating while I did nothing. I started calculating and recalculating the numbers in a notebook I had brought from India, the kind of squared notebook we used at school. I wrote the numbers, crossed them out, rewrote them, as if changing the order of the bills would change reality. It didn't. The room rent was due in 22 days. I had $63 in my account. $63. That number was engraved in my head like a tattoo. $63 between me and nothing. It was that week that my mother called on a Thursday afternoon. In her time, it was night in India. Arjun, your father went to the bank today. Next month's installment is due in 10 days. They said if it's not paid, they will charge a fine. She said this in that calm voice that Indian mothers use when they are frightened but don't want to show it. That voice that says, I am informing you, but that actually says, son, please, save us. I closed my eyes. Don't worry, Ma, I'm already taking care of it. A lie. The biggest lie I had ever told in my life. After the call ended, I sat on the edge of the mattress for perhaps 20 minutes without moving, staring at the wall, listening to the wind outside hitting the barely closed window. Shame is a physical thing. It has weight. It tightens the stomach. It rises up through the throat and sits there, like something you swallowed and cannot digest. I had let my mother sell her wedding earrings. My father had mortgaged the house where we had lived for 20 years. My sister had given me the money she was saving for her own future, and I was sitting in a 40-square-meter rented room in Columbus, Ohio, with $63 in my account and 2 lungs that didn't work properly. I tried to find other jobs during those 2 weeks of rest. I sent resumes online. I went in person to some places. But without a consolidated American employment history, without references, and visibly ill, I coughed during interviews, which ended any conversation before it began. The doors simply didn't open. VJ tried to help as best he could. He referred me to a friend of his who needed help with a move. I worked 2 days carrying furniture, against medical advice because I needed the money, and earned $120. That paid for a week of groceries and bought a few more days of breathing room. But it was a hole I was trying to plug with my hands while it kept growing. On the 20th day, without a steady job, the apartment owner knocked on my door. He was a man named Mr. Patterson, in his early 50s, American, always wearing a cap. He wasn't a bad man. He was simply a businessman who had rented rooms to immigrants for enough years to know exactly what that look of panic on a tenant's face meant. Arjun! The rent was due 3 days ago, $450. I said I needed a few more days, that I was sorting it out, that I would pay soon. He nodded slowly, like someone who has heard that sentence hundreds of times. 5 more days, Arjun. After that, I will need the room. 5 days. I closed the door and stood in the center of the tiny room, staring at the suitcase, still partially unpacked in the corner. The same suitcase that had crossed the ocean with me, full of hope and clothes my mother had folded with care the night before my departure. And for the first time since arriving in America, I cried. Not the contained, ashamed kind of cry you do in silence so as not to wake the other residents. I cried for real, face in my hands, my whole body shaking. I cried for my mother, for her gold earrings. I cried for my father, for the mortgaged house. I cried for Priya, for her trousseau money. And I cried for myself, for the 36-year-old man who had crossed the world believing that effort was enough, that working hard was enough, that love for family was enough. It wasn't. And in 5 days I wouldn't even have a room left to cry in. The worst was still to come. And I still hadn't found the courage to say a single true word to my family. There is a difference between knowing something is going to happen and actually living the moment when it does. I knew. I had known for 5 days. I had calculated, tried, silently begged the universe for something to change. A last-minute job, an unexpected transfer, a small, modest miracle. The kind that doesn't appear in movies but sometimes appears in real life when you need it most. The miracle never came. On the morning of the 5th day, Mr. Patterson knocked on my door at 9 o'clock. This time, he wasn't alone. There was another man behind him, younger, wearing a jacket, holding a clipboard. I didn't need an explanation. I already knew what that clipboard meant. Arjun, I'm sorry. I need the room. He said it with the tone of someone who genuinely feels bad. And maybe he did, but feelings don't pay rent, and compassion doesn't revoke an eviction. These were rules. And the rules had no exceptions for 36-year-old Indian men with inflamed lungs and $41 in their bank account. I picked up my suitcase. I folded the blanket I had bought at a second-hand store and placed it on top of my clothes. I looked one last time at the tiny room, the beige walls, the barely closed window, the thin mattress on the floor, and walked out without saying a word, because there was nothing to say. I stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes with my suitcase beside me. The wind in Ohio in January cuts in a way that feels personal, as if the cold has an intention, as if it knows exactly where you are weakest and goes straight for that place. I called VJ. He answered after 4 rings. Arjun bhai, I would love to help, but my wife, you know how it is. I have no space. I called the only other Indian contact I had made in Columbus, a young man from Gujarat named Mitesh, who had added me to a WhatsApp group for Indians in Ohio. I left a message. He never replied. I texted my uncle Suresh in New Jersey. I explained the situation halfway, said I was going through a difficult moment, that I needed temporary help. He took 2 hours to respond. When he did, he said he was struggling too, that his apartment was full, that he was sorry. He was sorry. I stared at that message for a long time. That man who had called me from India with his excited voice, promising that America changed lives in 1 year, that a man who truly worked hard would always win. That man was now sending me, "I'm sorry," on a phone screen. I put the phone in my pocket and looked at the only place I had left. The car was a 2006 Honda Civic I had bought for $1,800 3 weeks after arriving. A necessity, because the bus didn't reach the warehouse in time for my 5 a.m. shift. It was old, with a dent on the driver's side, and a heater that took 15 minutes to warm up. But it ran, and in that moment, it was the only thing in the world that was entirely mine. I opened the trunk, put my suitcase inside, and sat in the driver's seat. I turned on the engine so the heater could start working, and I sat there, staring at the windshield, watching the light snow that had begun to fall cover the hood slowly. This is where I live now. The thought came clearly, directly, without drama, like an acceptance. Like when you look at a bill and accept the number even though you don't want to. This is where I live now. The first days inside the car were a survival exercise I never imagined I would learn in my life. I discovered that the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart was one of the few places where a parked car at night didn't draw immediate attention. There were others there too, not many, but enough for me to understand I was not the only one. A man in a white pickup truck I saw every morning when I woke up. An older woman in a blue sedan who never got out of her car. We never spoke to each other, but there was a silent understanding between us. The kind of understanding that only exists between people who are in the same fall. The car routine had its own rules, which I learned the hard way. The heater needed to run all night so I wouldn't freeze, which meant keeping the engine on, which meant gasoline. Gasoline I didn't have enough money to buy in sufficient quantity, so I learned to calculate. I would run the heater for 40 minutes, turn it off, wrap myself in the blanket, and endure the growing cold for another 20-30 minutes, until I couldn't take it anymore and turned it back on. I woke up every morning with my neck twisted from the reclined seat, with my hands frozen even inside the gloves, with the windshield completely covered in ice from the inside and outside. To wash myself, I used the Walmart bathroom. They didn't say anything, but I knew I couldn't make it too visible a habit, so I alternated between the Walmart, the McDonald's at the gas station 2 blocks away, and occasionally a public park restroom that had warm water. To eat, I bought as little as possible: sliced bread, peanut butter, bananas. Once a week, I allowed myself a warm meal at a cheap restaurant, not for pleasure, but because my body needed something that wasn't cold. The lung medication I kept taking without fail. That was one of the few commitments I didn't give up on, because without it, the crisis would return, and without health, I had absolutely no chance of climbing out of that hole. The nights were the worst, not because of the cold, though the cold was severe, not because of the physical discomfort, though sleeping on a reclined seat was slowly destroying my spine. The nights were worst because at night there was no distraction. At night, it was just me and my thoughts inside that Honda Civic in the Walmart parking lot, with the snow falling outside and the heavy silence of an American city that slept without knowing I existed. And the thoughts came all at once. My father at 5:30 in the morning, folding his white shirt. My mother opening the small red velvet box and taking out her earrings. Priya handing me the envelope with 3 months of her salary. Go, son. Go and don't bring us shame. I would lie with my eyes open in the dark, staring at the car ceiling and think, what do I do with this? What do I do with everything they gave me and that I wasted? Shame is not a simple emotion. It has layers. The first layer is embarrassment, the fear that others will find out. The second layer is guilt, the awareness that you failed people who trusted you. But there is a third layer, deeper, darker, that I was discovering in those nights inside the car. It is the moment when you begin to believe that failure is not what happened to you. It is what you are. My mother called on a Wednesday night. I was in the Walmart parking lot. The engine was off to save gasoline, and the cold inside the car had already dropped to a point where I could see my breath condensing in the air. The phone vibrated. Her photo appeared on the screen. the one I had taken on the morning of my departure. Her in a green sari, smiling with her eyes full of contained tears. I stared at the photo through 3 full rings. On the 4th, I answered, "Arjun! Son, are you okay? You haven't called in days." Her voice, warm, close, worried, the most familiar voice in the entire world. I opened my mouth to speak. Nothing came out. I stayed silent for 2-3 seconds. She called my name again, with that slight rise in her voice that mothers have when their heart already knows something is wrong before their mind admits it. "I'm fine, Ma," I said. "I was working. You sound different. Your voice sounds different. It's the tiredness. It's a lot of working hours. Are you eating properly? Is it cold there?" I looked at the ice-covered windshield, at the snow falling outside, at the empty parking lot at 11 at night. "It's a little cold, yes, Ma, but I'm well covered." She spoke for a few more minutes, about the neighborhood, about the neighbor who had a new grandchild, about how Papa had a cold but was already better. Small things, normal things. Life continuing in Nagpur while her son slept in a car 12,000 kilometers away. Before hanging up, she said, "Arjun, I pray for you every single day. Every morning before chai, I light the diya and ask God to protect you. Did you know that? The diya, that small oil flame my mother had lit on the tiny wooden altar in the corner of our living room since before I was born. She lit a diya for me, every day, before chai." "I know, Ma," I said. "Thank you." I hung up the phone. And there, in a car parked in a Walmart parking lot in Columbus, Ohio, with -20 degrees outside and $41 left in my account, I broke in a way I didn't know it was possible to break. It wasn't crying. It went beyond crying. It was a silence so deep, so heavy, that it felt like the entire world had stopped, like time had stopped, like I was the only human being awake in the entire universe, sitting in that cold seat, with my mother's photo still glowing on the phone screen in my hand. She lit a diya for me, and I couldn't even pay rent for a room. 90 days. 90 days since I boarded that plane in Nagpur with my 23-kilogram suitcase, the English dictionary, and a heart full of promises. 90 days since my father squeezed my hand with that silent strength. 90 days since my mother held me at the airport until I gently had to pull away. And what did I have to show for it? No money sent home, no job, no roof, an old car in an empty parking lot, 2 lungs that still wheezed in the cold, and a shame so enormous it had become part of my breathing. It came in and went out with the frozen air. Constant! Impossible to ignore. I had failed my father. I had failed my mother. I had failed Priya. I had failed every year of silent sacrifice my family had dedicated so that I could have one chance. And the cruelest part of all, the part that kept waking me in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, was that they still didn't know. They still woke up every morning in Nagpur believing their son was working hard in America, that soon the money would come, that the sacrifice had been worth it. My mother was still lighting the diya, and I didn't have the courage, not the courage of success, not even the courage of failure, to tell them the truth. That night, I reclined the driver's seat as far back as it would go, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and stared at the car ceiling. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, indifferent, covering the parking lot, the cars, the streets, the entire city with that white layer that erases everything and leaves no trace. I thought, this is how a dream dies. Not with noise, not with drama. It simply grows colder and colder and colder until you wake up one morning and realize you can no longer feel the warmth. I closed my eyes, and at some point, I don't know when, exhaustion defeated shame, and I fell asleep. I slept in a car, in the cold, alone, thousands of kilometers from home, with a broken heart and my mother's diya still burning in Nagpur, lighting an altar for a son who had promised never to bring her shame. 90 days. That's all it took. And to this day, I still haven't told her the truth. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. America promises a lot, but nobody tells you the price some people pay in silence. Arjun Sharma, Columbus, Ohio. Columbus.